She was married for a bet. What happened next shocked the whole town. Some stories are born out of human cruelty. Clara Bennett, a woman made the subject of men's laughter and wagers. Wade Thornton, the man who placed that bet to prove himself, never knowing the drunken dare would alter his life forever. A cold wedding, sneering eyes, an entire town waiting for her to run. It all seemed written in stone. But fate never walks the path men expect. Out of scorn and barrenness, Clara found a way to sow life. Out of ashes and fire, she unearthed the strength to stand. And in the frozen heart of a man, she lit what no one believed in: true love. Dust Wind, New Mexico, 1884. The late sun scorched the red dirt streets, dust rising with every hoofbeat. Inside the stifling air of the Silver Spur Saloon, tobacco smoke hung thick, cloaking wrinkled faces and whiskey-thirsty eyes. Laughter clashed with the slap of playing cards, tangled with the offbeat strum of a banjo in the corner. At a back table sat Wade Thornton, brim of his hat shadowing a hard jaw. Owner of the sprawling Thornton Ranch, known across the territory, land-rich, cattle-rich, but sharp-tempered and famed for never losing a bet. His whiskey glass sat half-drained, eyes dulled yet still carrying that cold edge. Across from him lounged Luther Hale, merchant, loudmouth, notorious for stirring trouble. He lowered his voice just enough for the whole room to hear. "Guess you've heard, Wade. Widow Bennett. Not a man alive willing to take her in, not even with a dowry. Dead weight, that's all she is." The table burst into laughter. Clara Bennett's name, a young widow left alone by tragedy, renting a room at the edge of town, had long been their cruel sport. They called her the Ghost in Black, pitied and mocked in equal measure. Wade tipped back the rest of his whiskey, then slammed the glass down. The sharp crack cut through the noise. His voice came out gravel deep, heavy with liquor, but hard as lead. "I'll marry her inside a week, for 60 acres and that new stud horse of yours, Luther." Silence swallowed the saloon. Then came the roar, derisive laughter, slaps on tables, men whistling like it was the finest joke they'd ever heard. Some scribbled the wager into notebooks. From the shadows, one man didn't laugh: Sheriff Cole Turner. The old lawman stepped forward, his boots thudding on worn planks. He fixed Wade with a stare that cut through the smoke. "Thornton, you just wagered more than land. You wagered a life, and a life ain't something you throw on the table." Wade only smirked, tugging his hat lower, letting the warning slide off like rain on stone. To him, it was just another bet, and Wade Thornton had never lost. But Sheriff Turner knew this gamble carried a price no whiskey-soaked man could reckon. By morning, Dustwind buzzed like a hornet's nest. From the general store to the seamstress's porch, whispers carried Clara's name. Soon, she would be Mrs. Wade Thornton, not for love, but for 60 acres and a stallion. Pity and mockery followed her steps down the boardwalk, as if to tear at the widow's black dress she still wore. That evening, heavy knocks echoed down the boarding house hall. Clara opened her door to find Wade Thornton himself, tall, broad-shouldered, weather-carved by sun and wind. His eyes held no warmth, no disguise. She spoke before he could. "I know about the bet, Mr. Thornton." Her voice was steady, though her hands clenched tight beneath her skirts. "I'll agree, on one condition. You will never speak of the reason. Not to me, not to anyone." For a heartbeat, surprise flickered in Wade's eyes, then vanished. He nodded, like signing off on a cattle deal. To him, it was still a game of pride. But to Clara, it was the start of survival. 3 days later, the wedding took place in a cramped chapel. No flowers, no music, only a handful of onlookers wearing smirks. The minister stumbled through vows as though even he doubted their union. No townsfolk offered blessing. Outside, Clara flinched as a hand clutched hers. It was Annie, her younger sister. Fear and fury burned in the girl's eyes. She whispered fiercely, "Don't let him break you. Write me if you need, Clara. I'll always be here." Clara answered with a thin, sorrowful smile, yet her gaze held steel. From that moment on, every step would be watched, every whisper waiting for her to fail. But something quiet and unyielding had taken root in her heart. In the back, Sheriff Turner stood with arms folded. No grin, no judgment. Silently, he pulled a worn leather notebook from his coat, jotting down a few brief lines about the wager. No one noticed, but that note would one day split the truth wide open. As Wade's wagon rolled Clara away from the chapel, Luther Hale's mocking laugh rang in the yard. Sheriff Turner only shook his head, eyes following the couple into the storm of a future no bet could predict. And so I ask you, if you were there, whose side would you take? A. Clara Bennett, the woman forced into marriage by a cruel wager. B. Wade Thornton, the man who treated marriage as a test of pride. Or C. Another choice of your own? Share your thoughts below. The wagon rattled down the barren trail, dust billowing in clouds beneath the wheels. Clara sat silently in the back seat, her gaze fixed on the distance. So quiet the only sound left was the wind whistling through thorny cactus stands. Through the long miles, Wade Thornton barely spoke, only tugging at the reins now and then to steady the powerful team. The space between them was more than a few feet of wood. It was a canyon. By the time the sun bled into the horizon, Thornton Ranch came into view. A two-story house loomed against the empty land, its rough outline cast in the dying red light. Clara scanned it. No garden, no shade trees, no curtains at the windows. The place stood like a forsaken fortress, cold and stripped of any warmth. Wade yanked the reins, halting the wagon before the weather-worn porch. He jumped down, seized Clara's small valise, and dropped it on the step. No welcome, no hand extended. Only his hoarse, indifferent words. Your room's at the end of the hall. Breakfast at cockcrow, supper at sundown. The rest, that's up to you. Clara froze for a moment, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. She lifted her chin and studied the house. Thick timber walls, hollow windows, every part of it reflected its owner, closed off, unyielding, stripped of softness. Crossing the threshold, the stale scent of wood and damp dust pressed in. Furniture was crude, the floorboards groaned with every step. No paintings, no ornaments, only emptiness. Clara shivered. This wasn't a home. It was shelter, nothing more. A place without a soul. Wade pointed down the long corridor, faint light flickering from a few hurriedly hung oil lamps. He set his hat on the rack, turned, and walked out again, leaving her in the stillness of the strange house. Clara drew a deep breath, hand on her valise. Loneliness weighed heavy, pressing on her chest. Yet instead of trembling, her eyes burned with resolve. However cold and hollow this place was, it would not break her. Her first night at Thornton Ranch began in silence, wrapped in the icy gulf between two strangers. But inside Clara, an oath rose like steel. If this was a battle, she would not be the one defeated. Morning broke with a lone rooster crowing against the desert quiet. Clara was up before dawn, her work-toughened hands trembling slightly as she pushed open the kitchen door. The room was dark, soot-stained, abandoned for years, pots and pans crusted with grease, the stove stone-cold, the air thick with mold and ash. Clara didn't hesitate. She rolled up her sleeves, hauled water from the well, and set to scrubbing each pan, each blackened surface. The cold water bit her skin raw, but she worked on as though she were washing away the town's contempt. By the time the stove glowed with fire again, sweat dampened her hair beneath her scarf. but her eyes gleamed brighter than ever. Outside, Wade returned from the stables. His boots struck the floorboards with heavy thuds, and then he stopped. Before him, the rough table held something it hadn't in years, a full breakfast. Golden eggs, crisp bacon, fresh baked bread still steaming, and a pot of coffee sending up rich curls of smoke. Wade hesitated, his iron face loosening for just a breath. He sat, ate without a word. But when the plate lay empty, it was the clearest praise Clara needed. By noon, she carried a basket of food to the ranch hands. Hank, the old stableman who'd worked the ranch his whole life, tipped his hat and spoke for the first time. "Mrs. Thornton." Clara blinked. The title fell like an acknowledgement, soft yet heavy. For the first time since the wedding, a spark of hope flickered within her. That evening, back in the kitchen, she set about putting order to the chaos. Clearing out an old wooden cabinet, she discovered a small chest under layers of dust. The hinges groaned as she pried it open. Inside, a worn embroidered kerchief, a rag doll, and a faded photograph. A young woman smiled from the picture, a baby boy in her arms. Clara stood frozen, the photo trembling in her hands. There was more to Wade Thornton than stone and silence. That night, under the wavering light of a single oil lamp, Clara sat at her small desk and wrote to Annie. "This house needs a soul, and so do I. However cold it feels, I will not let it swallow me whole. Believe me, I will endure." She folded the letter, slid it into an envelope. Outside, the desert wind hissed through empty frames, cold as steel. But in her heart, a flame had been struck. "So I ask you, if you were here, whose side would you take?" A. Clara Bennett, the woman determined to turn a house into a home. B. Wade Thornton, the man closed off, hiding a secret in his past. Or C. Another choice of your own? Share your thoughts below. Sunday morning, the sky over Dustwind stretched pale blue, the wind scattering dust across the fields. Clara wore a plain black dress, neat and pressed, her hands holding an old Bible. She stood on the porch of Thornton Ranch, lifting her chin toward Wade, who was busy tightening a saddle strap as if she weren't even there. "We're going to church," Clara said, her voice firm. Wade froze a moment, then looked up, eyes cool. "I don't keep that habit, and I don't aim to start now." Clara didn't argue. She simply walked to the wagon, fastened the reins herself, and climbed onto the driver's bench. Her defiance lay in silence. Come along, or let her go alone. Wade frowned, but turned away, leaving her to guide the team out of the ranch gates. The 15-mile road to town wasn't long, yet every turn of the wheels felt like a blade testing Clara's resolve. Dustwind had grown used to laughing at her, and now, stepping into the church, she knew she would face them all at once. The little white-painted chapel, roof weathered gray, was already packed. Conversation dropped to a hush as Clara entered. Eyes pierced her, scorn, pity, suspicion. In the center pew, Luther Hale, the very man who had started the vile wager, chuckled loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look there, the bride of a bet," he sneered, drawing snickers from nearby men. Clara heard every word, yet her steps never faltered. She walked straight down the aisle, chin high, calm enough to silence the whispers. Her skirt brushed the boards, each footfall striking like a declaration. She would not bow. Reverend Jacobs began the sermon, his voice echoing through the room. That day, he chose scripture on the sanctity of marriage, not just union between two souls, but a vow before God himself. When his eyes lifted, they lingered on Clara, a deliberate reminder before the entire congregation. Clara sat still, hands gripping her Bible, back straight, gaze fixed on the pulpit. She never lowered her head. Though judgment hung in the air, she carried her pride like armor. And for a moment, the murmurs seemed feeble beside her silent strength. When the service ended, people lingered, watching her in hushed speculation. Luther searched for fear in her eyes. Instead, he met only calm disdain. His smirk collapsed. Clara left the chapel, her poise unbroken, yet inside her spirit burned hotter than ever. The story of her presence at church ran through town all week. Whispered comments, sharp glances followed her along every street. Which was why, when Mrs. Peterson, the formidable head of Dustwind's Women's League, sent Clara an invitation to their Thursday gathering, folks were stunned. Clara knew better. It wasn't welcome. It was a snare. That evening, Clara arrived at the lit house, her dress neat, a basket of fresh bread on her arm, a gesture of goodwill. But on the door hung a sign, meeting postponed, personal reasons. Through the lace curtains, she saw them inside. Women gathered around a bright table, teacups glinting, laughter drifting out. They hadn't even bothered to hide the cruelty. They wanted her to see, to know she wasn't accepted, to watch her walk away, humiliated. Clara didn't cry. Her dark eyes turned cold. Straight-backed, she walked down the steps, each footstep ringing steady. At the gate, Annie rushed up, worried. "They're awful, Clara. They say you were forced to marry, that Wade won't keep you a month." Clara touched her sister's shoulder, offering a thin, steel-edged smile. "What matters isn't what they think today, Annie. It's what they'll think tomorrow." That night, the western silence stretched taut, broken only by hoofbeats on hard ground. Clara held the reins, Sheriff Turner's warning echoing in her chest, like hammers on the wall she'd built around her heart. To these people, a woman's life was nothing but another bet. But Clara knew, if she let their words pierce her, she would lose the fragile faith she'd just begun to kindle. She turned her horse toward Wade's ranch. The moon lit the fence posts, the slanting roofline. In the distance, a lone lamp still burned. Wade was awake, perhaps wrestling his own ghosts. As Clara stepped down into the yard, a harsh laugh sliced the night. Low, jagged, mean. 3 men lurched from the shadows, faces she recognized from the saloon. Joe Riker, ringleader of the bet, flanked by 2 cronies. In their hands glinted bottles and steel. "Well, if it ain't Wade's new bride," Joe sneered. "They say you're the only thing keeping him tied to this sorry ranch. Thought we'd test just how strong that tether is." Clara stood tall, not a step back. The wind tore at her hair, her eyes flaring in the moonlight. "You have no right to touch me, or this ranch. This isn't the ground for your filthy wagers." Joe barked a laugh, his voice echoing across the plain. "Right? Around here, rights belong to the man who takes them." He lifted his knife, stepping closer. At that instant, the ranch door slammed open. Wade strode out, revolver in hand, eyes like steel blades. "Enough!" His voice was low, but carried fury and command. The 3 froze. "Joe, you know the law. Step onto my land at midnight. You've chosen death." The revolver gleamed black under the moon. The air thickened, silence broken only by pounding hearts. Joe forced a crooked grin, sweat beading. "Now, Wade, no need for heat. We were just foolin'." "Foolin'?" Wade advanced, each step heavy. "By threatening my woman in the dark?" Clara stood still, her gaze locked on him. For the first time, she saw the struggle in him. A man bound by grief, now standing as her shield. At last, Joe lowered the knife, raising both hands. "All right, we're leaving." He jerked his head, and the others backed off, their steps quick and clumsy across dry grass. When their shadows vanished, Wade lowered the gun, hand still trembling. He turned to Clara, eyes clouded with worry he couldn't hide. "Clara, you shouldn't be alone here. They'll be back. And next time, I might not be in time. Clara stepped close, resting her hand on his arm. I'm not afraid, Wade. They bet you'd cast me aside. But the way you stood tonight, I know you never will. Her words lit something in his eyes. In that moment, Wade's stone-hard shell cracked, revealing a man yearning for home, for something real. He nodded, gripping her hand like a vow. Outside, the wind still hissed across the prairie, but under the porch lamp's glow, a new trust took root, stronger than gossip, stronger than wagers, and that very night, Dustwind began buzzing again. The whispers weren't about when Wade would abandon Clara. They were whether, for the first time in years, the hard-edged rancher had found a reason worth fighting for. Not the ranch, but the woman who refused to leave. As Clara rode out of town beneath the moon, the laughter of the Women's League still floated faint behind her. But her horse's steady hooves told another tale. The story of a woman reclaiming her honor, even as a whole town rose against her. So tell me, if you were there, whose side would you take? Clara Bennett, the woman facing scorn with pride. B, the women of the League, those who mocked and excluded. Or C, another choice? Leave a comment below and let me know you're still with the story. It was a sweltering afternoon, the sun hanging overhead like a burning coal when Clara wandered the ranch grounds. In recent days, she'd grown used to life at Thornton Ranch, rising early to stoke the fire, preparing meals for the hands, sweeping out a house long absent of a woman's care. But that day, her steps carried her farther, northward, toward the land the ranch hands never spoke of. Before her stretched a wide, barren patch, grass scorched to gold, broken fences leaning like forgotten sentinels. Once this had been fertile pasture, but it had lain abandoned for 2 seasons. Clara knelt, scooped a handful of soil, let it crumble through her fingers. Dry, thin, weary, but not dead. Memory rose like a ghost of her father, the patient farmer, whispering, "When soil grows tired, let clover heal it. That small plant can bring the life back." Clara's eyes lit with sudden fire. The thought of reviving this land breathed new life into her own spirit. That evening, while Wade brooded on the porch, she stood before him, unflinching. "The north field can be saved. If we sow clover, it'll restore the ground. My father did it, saved his farm during the drought of '74. Wade didn't answer. His eyes flickered, half surprise, half indifference before he turned away. Yet Clara caught it. A faint tremor at the corner of his gaze. A crack in the wall he wore around himself. The next dawn, Clara stepped onto the porch. Mist hung low, pale light brushing the land. And there, neatly set on the step, lay a fresh sack of clover seed. No note, no words, only silence. But Clara understood. Wade had heard her. In his own rough way, he had acknowledged. Clara clutched the sack close, a quiet smile curving her lips. This wasn't victory, but it was a beginning. Her life, like the land, had been scorched, despised, left for dead. Yet with patience, with seed sown, one day it could bloom again. Summer's heat bore down on Dustwind, fierce and dry. On that forsaken northern field, Clara knelt with soil-stained hands, eyes bright as dawn. From cracked ground, fragile shoots pushed upward, green as a miracle. Clover, the humble plant she'd trusted, was weaving a living quilt across the dead earth. The ranch hands, who'd watched in silence with doubt, now paused to stare. Hank, the old stableman, nodded. "Reckon she's right. Land's still breathin'. Just needed someone to wake it." Clara smiled, sweat streaking her sun-browned face. She needed no praise, only the quiet shift in their eyes, the weight of trust. Soon, one by one, they came to her, asking about soil, about planting days, about the lessons she'd learned at her father's side. Thornton Ranch, once ruled only by Wade's commands, now carried another voice. Hers. Word spread fast into town. At the saloon, Luther Hale seized the chance to jeer. His shrill laugh cut through the din. Clover and Dustwind? Wait till it dries to dust. Thornton's wife will give up before the season's done. But before the laughter could swell, Wade, leaning quiet at the bar, suddenly turned. He seized Luther's collar, yanking him close, his voice thunderous as a storm. The name Mrs. Thornton don't belong in your filthy mouth, Hale. Keep your tongue, or you'll lose more than land. The saloon froze. For the first time since the bet, Wade had stood for Clara. Openly, fiercely. The silence that followed was its own reckoning, stripping away part of the laughter that had long haunted her. That afternoon, as Clara gathered tools in the field, a young ranch hand crept near, eyes darting. You ought to be careful, ma'am, he whispered. I overheard. Luther ain't just out to shame you. He's plannin' to buy this ranch up, soon as the bet breaks Wade. He's been schemin' all along. Clara froze, her hand tightening around the basket of seed. A larger plot was taking shape. Her marriage had never been just a cruel joke. It was a piece in Luther Hale's plan to claim the Thornton land. She lifted her gaze toward the ranch house, where Wade stood silent on the porch. In his weary eyes, Clara glimpsed it. The truth that if this ranch fell, he would lose not only his land, but the last fragment of soul binding him to life itself. And Clara knew she could not let that happen. So tell me, if you were here, whose side would you take? Clara Bennett, the woman sowing life and vowing to defend the ranch. B. Wade Thornton, the man who, for the first time, stood to defend his wife. Or C. Another choice? Share your thoughts below and let me know you're still riding with this story. The suffocating heat of summer lay heavy over Dustwind, a curse without end. For weeks, not a drop of rain had fallen. The earth split open in cracks, grass crumbled brittle as straw, cattle thinned to bones for lack of water. Each day, Clara stood at the edge of the dry creek bed, staring at the web of fissures spreading like veins across the ground, her heart tightening with dread. That evening, a column of thick black smoke rose from the west, where a band of migrant tents had been pitched. Wind carried sparks like whips, and within minutes, fire leapt across the dry hills, racing straight for Thornton Ranch. Wade thundered in from the fields, face set like iron. Clara, take what you need and get out. This blaze will swallow everything. But Clara didn't move. She scanned the parched land, her mind racing. The fire could not be stopped, but it could be cut off. In a flash, she dashed into the cellar, dragging out the jars of fruit preserves she had been making for weeks. The hands stared in disbelief as she smashed them one by one around the perimeter of the house and barn. Sticky sugar spread over the ground. Once lit, it would burn fast, flare hot, then die, leaving a fire break. "Light it here! Our fire will stop theirs!" she shouted, her voice so fierce even Wade froze. The second fire roared up, forming a blazing wall that slowed the inferno charging toward them. But then the wind turned, shoving smoke and flame toward the stables, where two young ranch hands were trapped. Their cries cut through the chaos. Wade lunged to run, but Clara was already in motion. She sprinted for the stables, eyes locked on Wade's prized stallion, the black warhorse no one was ever allowed to ride. In a moment of life and death, Clara vaulted onto its back, seized the reins. The beast screamed, then tore into the smoke. Clara bent low, eyes stinging, hands like steel. Heat seared her skin. Smoke clawed her lungs, but she drove on. She found the two boys huddled in the choking dark, faces blackened, coughing. Without pause, she hauled them up, turned the horse, and plunged back through the wall of fire. When they burst through the smoke, the ranch froze in disbelief. Horse and riders tore free into the open, met by a roar of relief from the men. Clara nearly collapsed, arms blistered from burns, but she held the reins until all three were safe. Wade ran to her, his eyes, so long cold and shuttered, now wide with horror and something deeper, rawer. In that instant, all knew. The woman who had once been wagered like cattle had saved the ranch with a courage no one had imagined. All night the wildfire raged, until only ash drifted in the dawn air. The hands sat slumped on the ground, faces streaked black with soot. Above them, the sky turned pale gray, carrying the first fragile light of morning, the light of salvation after nightmare. Clara, exhausted, slumped against the porch post. Her arm was red and blistered, her hands bloodied from the reins, her eyes heavy with sleep. Yet even in her fitful rest, her face carried the same fierce resolve, her burned dress hem and smoke-stained hair bearing witness to a woman who had stood against death itself. Wade lingered nearby, silent. Dawn's glow swept across his sun-weathered face. His eyes, once frozen against all feeling, lingered long on Clara. In that moment, the ice around his heart cracked. No longer did he see a wager won in drunken pride. He saw the woman who had risked her life to save his ranch, and the people he had always kept at arm's length. He bent slightly, hand hovering near hers, but pulled back. Instead, Wade draped his heavy coat over her shoulders, shielding her wounds, hiding the weary truth she would never ask anyone to see. From afar, Sheriff Cole Turner rode slowly in. He had trailed the fire through the night. When the last embers died, he dismounted, stooping near a charred oak. There, half-burned, lay a matchbox, its print still clear. Hale Trading Co. Coats. Turner narrowed his eyes, a chill running his spine. He closed his fist around the matchbox. The fire had not been nature's fury. It was arson, and Luther Hale had finally shown his hand. The sheriff looked up, toward the porch where Clara slept and Wade stood watch. He said nothing, slipping the matchbox into his coat. The time had not yet come to expose the truth. But when it did, the whole town would be forced to ask, who was the real disgrace? Dawn spread over Dustwind, casting light on scorched fields, yet glinting, too, on the stubborn clover sprouts that had survived the flames. Proof that from fire and ashes, life would always find a way. Proof that Clara Bennett, the woman once scorned as a bet, was that life itself. So tell me, if you were here, whose side would you take? Also, Clara Bennett, the woman who risked her life to defend the ranch and her honor. B. Wade Thornton, the man who, for the first time, let his guarded heart break open. Or C. Another choice? Share your thoughts below and let me know you're still with this story. Word of Clara's daring stand against the wildfire swept through Dustwind faster than desert wind. Those who once mocked her now whispered in disbelief. And then, one morning, the sound of wagon wheels echoed at the Thornton gate. 3 carriages loaded with food, cloth, and water pulled up. Leading them was none other than Mrs. Peterson, the head of the Women's League who had once turned Clara away. We brought a little something. The ranch needs supplies after the fire, she said, her smile tight, eyes unable to meet Clara's. Clara opened the door, face calm, voice steady. No reproach, no mention of past slights. She welcomed them in, poured coffee, shared fresh bread. The Lord teaches us to help one another in hardship. I'm grateful you came, she said softly. Her grace made their former whispers vanish like smoke. The woman once branded a bride of a bet, now stood as a hostess of dignity. From the porch, Wade watched in silence. For the first time, pride flickered in his steely eyes. Clara had saved the ranch not only with courage and grit, but with the rare gift of turning scorn into respect. That night, after the lamps dimmed, Wade and Clara sat together in the parlor, firelight flickering on the timbered walls. For the first time, The icy gulf between them gave way to openness. They spoke of loss. Wade of the wife and child he had buried to sickness. Clara of years left destitute by a husband's debts. Their voices softened into silences filled with understanding. In the glow, Wade turned, voice low but true. I once thought you were nothing but the burden of a drunken bet. But now, I know I was wrong. Clara said nothing, only met his eyes. That look was enough. The next morning, Annie arrived at the ranch, a sealed envelope trembling in her hands. Father's old partner. He sent back what he once stole. This money, it was meant for us. Clara, with this, you can leave. Start fresh anywhere. Clara opened it. A thick stack of bills stared back. Freedom lay there. Escape from the ranch. From the shadow of that cruel wager. But when she lifted her gaze, her eyes found Wade, standing in the morning light on the porch, his frame carved against the rising sun. She smiled faintly. The choice was clear. Clara stayed, not out of duty, not out of debt, but because she had found something she never had before, a true companion. That autumn, Dustwind gathered for the Harvest Festival, the grandest celebration of the year. In the wide town hall, lanterns glowed, banjos strummed, laughter filled the air. But when the great doors swung open, the hall fell still. Wade Thornton and Clara Bennett entered, not as strangers bound by wager, but as a man and wife in truth. Clara wore a simple dark blue dress, her eyes alight beneath the lamps. Wade, in his old brown vest, stood tall beside her, pride shining without the frost. In that moment, all the cruel rumors, all the mocking laughter of the past year, dissolved into silence. From the crowd stepped Luther Hale, the man who had sparked it all, his face pale, his hand clenched tight around his hat. Before the entire town, he bowed his head. Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Thornton, I was wrong. That bet, it was a mistake no man can forgive. Gasps rippled through the hall. Never had Dustwind seen Luther, the proudest schemer of them all, bow so low. Then Sheriff Cole Turner stepped forward, leather notebook in one hand, a half-burned matchbox in the other. His voice rang sharp. This town deserves the truth. The fire that nearly destroyed Thornton Ranch was no accident. I found the evidence, marked plain from Hale Trading Committee. Luther Hale not only started that vile wager, he tried to take the land with fire. The whispers turned to outrage. Luther's head hung lower, shame burning on his face. But Clara only spoke with calm clarity. We all make mistakes, Mr. Hale. What matters isn't the past. It's the life we choose from this day forward. Applause rose, thunderous, unrelenting. From that day, no one dared call Clara a bride of a bet again. A year later. Dawn broke over Thornton Ranch. The northern pasture rolled green with clover, cattle grazing fat and easy. The two-story house, once hollow, now brimmed with color and laughter. A new barn stood tall, fences straight and strong. On the porch, Wade stood hand in hand with Clara, watching the sun rise red across the horizon. From a cruel wager, they had walked through fire, through ashes, and found love forged in trial, love built on pride, patience, and a strength neither had known. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, a smile warming her eyes. See, Wade? They once thought I was just a joke, but we proved them wrong. Wade said nothing, only tightened his grip on her hand. For sometimes, the truest things need no words. Beneath the radiant sunrise, Clara and Wade's story comes to rest, not as the bride of a bet, but as proof that love can grow even from the harshest soil. From clover sprouts to raging fire, they endured side by side, finding trust companionship, and joy. Dear friends, maybe each of us has known the sting of being underestimated, of being mocked. But like Clara, sometimes all it takes is resolve and grace to rewrite the story of our lives. If this tale touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of Clara's journey moved you most? We'd love to hear, because often, your stories and memories may be the light that guides someone else. Together, let's keep these human stories alive so love and faith never fade.